Yo, we're going to go ahead and get started. This clock is slow.
But you can tell the story if you want to.
Dennis had suggested we go around and kind of do like we did when we were on Zoom. However, in light of the fact that we have non-counting number of prophets today to cover, I think we'll let John have the majority of the time. Maybe next week we'll do the go-around thing. Anyway, just brief reminders. Today's our hymn sing in the service. And Dennis and Laura were like either in Denmark or on their way to Denmark. I was telling Debbie that they're on flight 3 of 7 in their trip thus far today. Like today, I think they take their next flight. So things are going well for them. There's so many announcements. I brought some extra tapestries, but didn't put them out. Sorry. Welcoming Debbie and David.
Yeah.
I was about to say David, and I was like, wait, I need to make sure that's not your son. So, thank you. Sorry about that. To our class, have y'all been in here before? No. Okay, first time. We're so glad to have you here. One thing I did want to highlight that's in the tapestry in the order of worship. Joan is in desperate need, I'll go ahead and say desperate need, of preschool workers for the preschool ministry. Now, I will tell you, even if you're not comfortable like signing up to do something every week, I think she would welcome the opportunity to have some subs, because I imagine even if she could get some rotating people through there, it would be helpful. So, those kids are so sweet, and they haven't really learned to talk back yet. So this is the joy about that age group that and sorry, one of the most important things, happy birthday, David Slatton. We're so glad to have him back with us. His birthday is today. Yes,
sometimes those preschoolers at Wilshire grow up to go to Baylor and Arkansas. Okay, yes. Virginia and Derek are both starting college.
Very true.
I can't believe it.
There's a whole lot of reward that you can't put a price tag on when you like sit in the congregation on Graduate Sunday in May and go, wow, I had them in kindergarten, it's kind of mind-boggling, but it is, and I had the experience during Vacation Bible School that I was helping lead Vacation Bible School with a young lady who I had in 5th and 6th grade mission, actually 2 young ladies I had in 5th and 6th grade missions. So it was very much the cycle of life. Like when you hang around, you get to watch life go by. So anyway, John, I will let you reintroduce yourself. We're very grateful that you are here teaching today, and I'm going to give you a chunk of time. So
it was a little intimidating that it required 2 columns to put our scriptures in.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not Laura Smith, so my handwriting does not compare.
It's much better than mine. I have to apologize all week to my students that my handwriting. When I put it out loud. Doesn't look like your clock is a little slow. About 7 minutes. There look to be many fewer of you this Sunday. There's such a time change.
We might have a 10 o'clock crowd, right? Like 8 used to be. Those that didn't get the memo.
That's right. In my class, I'm used to more like a 10-15 crowd coming in. That's okay. All right, so when did you start studying the Old Testament?
You mean like in life or in this class?
In this class.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Last January.
Probably January.
January of this year?
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's been pretty much rapid fire the entire 2020.
Yeah, we tear through the Old Testament And then spend about 15 months on it.
Okay. All right, just wondering. Well, today our assignment is the minor prophets. And that has nothing to do with their importance. Okay, you can't think, they didn't make the big leagues as the prophet. They don't have anything worth saying. Minor in this case is just implying that their writings are shorter than, say, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, or what is attributed to those, okay? So it's kind of unfair that we call them minor. But there are, sometimes, Daniel's relatively short too, but we already did that. So just as we did last week in our cruise through Ezekiel and Daniel, and apparently you've been a whirlwind tour of the Old Testament all year. It's not like we're going to understand each of these prophets in his own circumstance. Okay, what we're trying to do to try to understand some things from the Old Testament, what are some common themes that these prophets are doing? What are they saying, right? And I think we can narrow it down to probably just a couple of things as we read through these. So we are going to spend time actually reading these so that we, as a group, can draw some conclusions. Okay? And then next week, it's fun-filled, summarize the entire Old Testament and the period between the Testaments.
Is that you?
Yes.
George?
Yeah. Well, I signed up for that because like, oh, that's fascinating, and that'll make me study. And I'm hoping that still happens. Yeah. So that does sound like something a pastor would do, right? So,
Did George usually do it?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
anyway, that's what we're going to do. So we're wrapping up the Old Testament. Okay. And next week we're going to ask questions like, why is it here? Why do we pay attention to it? Why does we study it? What does it do for us? Because it should be more than just setting the stage, right? There are some real things here. Okay, so
I heard a guy on the radio the other day talking, and he was talking about revolution. I don't know, you know, like everybody now, this must be the time when everybody, Baptists anyway, are into Revelation. I said revolution. But anyway, he was saying, says, if you don't understand Revelation, that's because you don't understand the Old Testament. Go back. And I thought, well, maybe we should have been studying that. When I was growing up, a few of us are old enough to remember that, we didn't even acknowledge the Old Testament was there. The New Testament and Jesus took the place of that Old Testament. Let's just skip it.
okay.
Wow.
But and since most of you have printed Bibles, if you held up the Old Testament section versus the New Testament section, one is considerably larger than the other.
Really?
Well, one thing that makes us uncomfortable about Revelation, because it's totally different from any other New Testament book, but it's got a lot of visions and imagery that we have seen. Like last week, we had visions from Ezekiel and Daniel that do remind us more of Revelation. So we at least ought to be used to that idea. And that way, it may not come as such a shock to us that Revelation is coming this way. All right. So I cannot watch the clock. I actually have to watch my watch.
Yeah, because, sorry, I forgot to tell you, that clock is horrifically slow, so.
So. But you know, I treat you just like my students. I tend to take up the entire period. All right. So let's go to Hosea. And Hosea is right after Daniel. And right before Joel, if that helps. Yeah, I used to get so lost in the prophets. I actually had to memorize them in the order they go in, just so I. And sometimes I have to run through my head. Oh, that's where it is. All right. And again, I know sometimes you appreciate the historical context, but that's not what we're after necessarily, because we have a lot of people to go through. So we're just trying to figure out what are the important messages. Right, the prophets are speaking for God. God is speaking through them. What are the big things for us? Okay. All right. So in Hosea, we're going to start with verse 2. Could someone read? Oh, and I should warn you, there are some really bizarre names coming up in this passage. So hold back your enthusiasm unless you're ready for that. Could someone read 2 through 8 or 2 through 9? Unless you want me to handle all the bizarre names. But someone read 2 through 9.
When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, "Go take for yourself a wife of whoredom, and have children of whoredom, for the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord." So he went and took Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. And the Lord said to him, "Name him Jezreel, for in a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. On that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel." She conceived again and bore a daughter. Then the Lord said to him, "Name her Lo-Ruhamah, for I will no longer have pity on the house of Israel or forgive them, but I will have pity on the house of Judah, and I will save them by the Lord their God. I will not save them by bow, or by sword, or by war, or by horses, or by horsemen." When she had weaned Lo-Ruhamah, she conceived and bore a son. Then the Lord said, "Name him Lo-Ami, for you are not my people, and I am not your God."
Okay, there's a lot in there. First, he started laughing in verse 2, the word keeps coming up.
Whoredom.
Okay, maybe this is another reason why we try to avoid the Old Testament, because there are lots of ugly things taking place. Okay, so what does he tell Hosea to do? What kind of wife should he find? Wait, okay. Many of you are looking at me like you don't want to say. Okay, can you imagine this message from God? Go find a prostitute, that's who you're going to marry. Okay, and children of that. But why? What does God say? Even in verse 2.
The children, his children, us, you know, are doing the same thing that
Right.
prostitutes do.
Yes. So go marry a whore, because this is symbolic of what Israel is doing.
Right.
This is what the people of God are doing. Now, how can the people of God be whores? Probably never been asked that question in Sunday school. I appreciate that. Yes.
They're worshiping false gods.
Okay, worshiping false gods. They have forgotten who God is, even after all that he's done. Okay, and one of the things that keeps striking me is, wow, right, part of the Red Sea, manna from heaven, if those people can forget and fall away, it seems to me that we have lots more distractions in 2022. How easy is it for us? We have to keep assessing ourselves based on what happens here. So he's basically telling his people, this is what you've done. You have prostituted yourself. You have been unfaithful. Harsh message. This is why we like the New Testament. God is love. He came to save us. Well, God still has a message of salvation, right? But there are expectations that go along with that, right? We have to understand who God is, okay? And so they have 3 kids, and they all get names. One is Jezreel, the place where an ancestor killed the king of Israel and his mother. Now, his mother was Jezebel, so when we read that, when you read that in the Old Testament, you're like, yes! But it wasn't God's plan for that to happen, or at least not to happen the way it was, okay? And then we get a name, I will have pity on the house of Judah. So you're splitting into two, you've split into 2 kingdoms. Israel, the most of the people, no, you're lost, but I'll have pity on Judah. And then, wow, this last name, you are not my people, and I am not your God.
Scary.
Things I don't want to hear. Okay? But right, these are the people of God, right? And God is saying, you are not my people, I am not your God, because you have forsaken, you've been unfaithful. Okay? We can cue the gloom and despair music. Okay, but then, for those of you who have subject headings, what's the subject heading right before verse 10?
The restoration of Israel.
The restoration. So God is trying again to get attention and make a point, but the promise always, the goal always is restoration. Right, of the relationship between God and his people. Okay, can someone read 10 just through the end of chapter 1, just those few verses?
Yet the number of the people of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which can be neither measured nor numbered. And in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, it shall be said to them, children of the living God. The people of Judah and the people of Israel shall be gathered together, and they shall appoint for themselves one head, and they shall take possession of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel.
Okay. So in what ways is Israel being restored in this promise?
They're gonna grow and multiply.
Okay, yeah, you're gonna be like the sand of the seas, you're gonna have lots of descendants. Okay, what's another way?
They're becoming children of the living God.
The one who just said, you are not mine and I am not yours, is that restoration? You will be, right? The descendants will be children of the living God. What else is gonna be restored?
The land. They're gonna take possession of the land,
Okay, restored to the land where you had, what else?
gathered together,
Who?
Judah and Israel.
Judah and Israel, right? Because we've just seen the mention of the division. Does that sound like a lot of restoration?
Mhm.
You're gonna go back home, you're gonna be together, you're going to multiply, and you will be children of the living God. Right? Can you have better promises than that? Okay, so all the way through, what we see in the Old Testament, yes, people wander, and God does what he can to draw them back. Okay, but always the hope is restoration and reconciliation. All right, moving on, chapter 3. Okay. Can someone read all of chapter 3?
The Lord said to me again, go, love a woman who has a lover and is an adulteress, just as the Lord loves the people of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love raisin cakes. So, that just threw me, I don't remember that.
I don't either.
So,
funny, isn't
I
it?
bought her for 15 shekels of silver and homer of barley and a measure of wine. And I said to her, you must remain as mine for many days. You shall not play the whore. You shall not have intercourse with a man, nor I with you. For the Israelites shall remain many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or pillar, without ephod or teraphim. Afterward the Israelites shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. They shall come in awe to the Lord and to his goodness in the latter days.
Okay, so once again, right, a prophet being told, and it sounds like he's already married, so this might be somebody else, but scholars don't seem to agree on exactly who this is referring to, but, right, a prostitute before, but now who? An adulteress. Okay, but why? It's symbolic again. What is it symbolizing? Again, Israel being unfaithful. Right, but what does this chapter end with? Just look at verse 5. Return and seek the Lord. Okay, so what we've seen so far, something really harsh, some judgment to try to get people back, but then the promise is the restoration and return. Okay, all right. I'm going to keep your fingers busy. Let's go to chapter 6. And this is going to look a little awkward because we're cutting off in the middle of a passage, but can someone read verses 1 through 5 in chapter 6 of Hosea?
Come, let us return to the Lord, for it is he who has torn, and he will heal us. He has struck down, and he will bind us up. After 2 days he will revive us. The third day he will raise us up, that we may live before him. Let us press on to know the Lord. His appearing is as sure as the dawn. He will come to us like the showers, like the spring rains that water the earth. What shall I do with you, O Ephraim? What shall I do with you, O Judah? Your love is like a morning cloud, like the dew that goes away early. Therefore I have hewn them by the prophets, I have killed them by the words of my mouth, and my judgment goes forth as the light.
Okay. And I'm going to add verse 6, just because I think it's relevant to something that we're going to see a little bit later today. For I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. Okay? At this time we have a reversal. How does chapter 6 begin? Right, come, let us return, right? So it's more the positive. After, he will revive us, right? He will raise us up. He is as sure as the dawn. He will come to us like the spring rains that water the earth. Or the August ones. I keep waiting for that, right? My weather forecast has said we've already should have had lots of rain.
Well, it's gone from now through Thursday to, now it's just today and tomorrow.
This one, okay, but then, what shall I do with you? Your love is like a morning cloud that disappears. Does that describe humanity? Short attention span, our right, devotion can take it. So he says, I have killed them by the words of my mouth, my judgment goes forth. So we started with the restoration, but then we're getting that God is still judging too. But chapter 6 gives us some practical reality. The desire is steadfast love, knowledge of God, more than the sacrifice, right? Because we can go through a ritual. Not to say bad things about my school, but we just have an all-school mass on Monday. And at Bishop Lynch, the only place big enough to hold all of us is one of our gyms. So, you know, we go to worship in the gym, which is a little bit different. But, you know, having come from a Baptist background, right, the Catholics have more set rituals than you and I do. I don't know if you've ever been through a mass, but I mean, they know what to say, when to stand up, when to sit down. And the priest has more of a ritual to prepare, right, for the Eucharist. But beliefs are slightly different, right? But what is God saying? That's not the point. Steadfast love and knowledge of God. Okay. But we've seen 3 sections of Hosea so far, right? What keeps happening? People get complacent, their attention wanders. To me, that we could describe ourselves that way on occasion. Or maybe regularly, right? So that happens. All right. Off we go. We're done with Hosea. Off to Joel we go. Joel chapter 2. You know, I tempted to say, okay, we got 12 people to study today, right? Hosea, he's a prophet, he said some stuff. Any questions? See, I have fun, right? I guess my regular Sunday school class, we study the Old Testament frequently because they're stuck with me as the regular teacher. And it's a lot of what we do. So we study Old Testament, New Testament, we study contemporary issues, and we look for different passages throughout. And then being me, they get a history section. Some regularity as well. So, but the Old Testament matters, right? Now I find it fascinating because there are a lot of historical stories, right? But you know, we like the New Testament better because there isn't war and rape and murder.
You know, when you think about just America, for example, with 9/11, how everybody pulled together, everybody went back to church. I mean, lots of people went to church that hadn't been, you know, in a long time. Historically, like, you know, the whole country came alive and decided this is where they need to be. And then we kind of, you know, and after wars, I mean, during wars and after wars, you know, we pulled together most of the time, except Vietnam didn't work that way. But, you know, it's,
well, actually, okay, Vietnam did initially.
Mhm.
It's only as it dragged on
Yeah.
that fell apart. But even initially, there was still a high degree of unity and support because, but that just coincided with, when you had Vietnam and then Watergate at the same time, then trust in government was going downhill. Really hasn't recovered. But you are right, because yes, people showed up in church, at least for a Sunday or two. And I don't think we as churches knew how to handle that. But even, right, I tell my students, of course this is before, you have to understand that my students, September 11th happened before they were born. Okay, makes me feel old. But Republican and Democrat Congress representatives and senators were holding arms, singing patriotic songs on the steps of the Capitol, right? They've never seen anything like that, because in their lifetimes, that has not been a political situation, okay? So falling away, right, not doing things, right, is a human thing to do, okay? But keep pulling back, right? God has ways to get our attention. And the whole point is not, me, right? What did it say? Steadfast love, knowledge of God. Okay? All right. Chapter 2 of Joel. Can someone read 12 and 13?
Yet even now, says the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting, with weeping, and with mourning. Rend your hearts and not your clothing. Return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and relents from punishing.
Okay. So what is God saying in this passage? What's the one thing he wants?
Us to return.
Yeah, return to the Lord. Okay. Now, we've only read a few passages of these prophets so far. What seems to be the overwhelming message?
Come back to me.
Yes.
Yes.
But what does that imply about the people of God?
They've been away.
Straight.
Yeah, whoops.
Yeah.
Okay, it doesn't seem to be a one-time thing. It seems to be an ongoing human issue.
These prophets cover a period of like 400 years though, don't they? Roughly, ish.
Yes.
So
Okay.
there's time for them to keep straying.
Yes.
Ron, are you making excuses for them?
But we're talking about, okay, so, on my way to Ulster this morning, listening to the radio, it was a lesson from Nehemiah, because that was returning, rebuilding the wall, and eventually rebuild, right, the temple, in Jerusalem. So there's return, and you think if God did that, you'd be focused on this, but that doesn't happen. Okay, somehow we get complacent and comfortable. And I guess we're uncomfortable with some extremists that seem to keep up energy, but that's tough to do over time as well. Okay, so return to me with fasting and weeping. Okay, that's not a ritual thing, that's devotion. Okay, because he says, rend your hearts, not your clothing. Right? Don't just do something outside. Because why? God is gracious and merciful, and we're like, yes, that's the one. Okay? God is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. Okay. We could place that in the New Testament and we wouldn't notice that it's because right, that's who God is. This is what God desires with us, right? This relationship. Okay? This idea of we keep having to hear return, return, return means what do? We keep wandering. Okay? People of God. All right. Chapter 3. Can someone read verses 1 through 3?
For in those days, and at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them there on account of my people and my heritage Israel, because they have scattered them among the nations. They have divided my land and cast lots for my people, and traded whores for prostitutes, and sold girls for wine, and drunk it down.
Okay,
Is that right?
and suddenly we're back. Okay, does this sound like a happy time? No. But what does he promise in verse 1? To restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem. Gather the nations, enter into judgment on account of my people and heritage. Why? Because the Israelites have been scattered, their land has been divided, boys have been sold as prostitutes, girls have been sold for wine. Okay? And the thing is, I'm just guessing because we're all here at Wilser. I'm doubting in the last few years our lives have gotten that desperate. Okay? For those of you with children, I hope that you never had to worry about your children being sold. Or your grandchildren. Okay? This is an extreme. Even in that case, though, what are people supposed to be paying attention to? Who God is. Right? And this is one of the tough things when we look at the Old Testament. Bad things happen. Like God doesn't promise, I'm going to smooth every curve. Life is but a dream. That's not the promise. What God promises is, whatever you're going through, I am there. And you can have my peace. Okay? So bad things happen. And I realize in the 21st century in the United States, we're so wealthy as a nation, right? We want to ameliorate the effects of anything negative, right? Trying to avoid those. And sometimes even as I'm child raising, because some of my teenagers, right, I have to deal with, life is rough. Okay, yeah, you didn't get a perfect score on this assignment. Get over it, right? Life moves on, but for some of them, right, that in itself is a traumatic experience, right? You got to get used to as life gets more complex and studies get more deep, right? You can't excel in everything. Some things don't get everything, but what should keep getting our attention? Steadfast love and knowledge of God. Okay, so here once again, that we keep the bad. Things can happen. People wonder, what does God promise and what does God desire? Restoration. Okay. Perhaps this sets the stage for the New Testament. Okay. All right. On to Amos. Look, I'm used to teaching world history, so we are used to leaving lots of things out. That's the first rule of teaching world history. Really study a few things. All right. Chapter 4. Please tell me if I give you a verse that I'm off. I think I got everything down the way I'm supposed to. I'm never off. Okay. Oh, this has some interesting. Yeah, this has some interesting imagery. I realize you're going to laugh if you haven't already, but this has some interesting imagery that we'll try to explain. Okay, but so I'm going to read verses 1 through 3.
Hear this word, you cows of Bashan, who are on Mount Samaria, who oppress the poor, who crush the needy, who say to their husbands, bring something to drink. The Lord God has sworn by his holiness, the time is surely coming upon you when they shall take you away with hooks, even the last of you with fish hooks. Through breaches in the wall you shall lead, each one straight ahead, and you shall be flung out into harmony, says the Lord.
Yeah. If we ever read this during worship, would you be uncomfortable saying, thanks be to God? Right, but this says the Lord. Okay, I realize in our society calling someone a cow has some negative connotation, perhaps. Okay, however, in this context, it kind of refers to being wealthy and therefore filled out. Okay? So being called, right, you're fat and healthy. Okay? Our connotation is much different, but that's, from what I understand, that's what they're trying to do.
Is that what it means by cows?
Yes, right, you wealthy who are comfortable because you oppress the poor and crush the needy, oh, bring me something to drink. And it does seem to be referring to women in this one instance. But comfortable, right, not doing, like crushing the needy. Okay, so we have to pay attention to that. Okay? And the Lord is sworn by his holiness. Now, they shall take you away with hooks and fish hooks. Okay? This sounds incredibly painful. Okay? But they were dealing with an empire. The Assyrians, who, when they captured people in war, actually used hooks through fences to lead people away. And that was sort of a sign of captivity. Yes. Yeah, would you have a pretty good idea that you're captive?
Yeah.
Right, tough to strain against that one. Okay, so, once again, now we're to the bad, but why is he saying you're going to be led away? you have become complacent, and what are you doing? Right, instead of steadfast love and knowledge of God, you're interested in your own comfort, your own demands, and you're oppressing the poor and needy. Okay? And again, we always have to ask ourselves the question, what are we doing? All right, off to chapter 5. Okay, someone read 6 and 7.
Seek the Lord and live, or he will break out against the house of Joseph like fire, and it will devour Bethel with no one to quench it. Ah, you that turn justice to wormwood and bring righteousness to the ground.
Okay, all right, yes. Sometimes when we skip around the Old Testament, the passages don't make sense quite the first time. Okay. So this time, right, what does it start? What's the very first part of verse 6? Seek the Lord. Or, right, he will break out like fire and devour. Turn justice to wormwood, and wormwood apparently is a bitter, a plant that tastes really bitter, has bitter flavor. So, right, again, the implication, you're doing bad things, right? You that turn justice to bitterness, seek the Lord. Okay. Now, so far, how many options have we seen? What are the two? It seems to me that there are two things that people have been portrayed as doing. What are those two things? Or two directions?
Ignoring the needs of the people, the other people,
Okay.
and,
I think that's one of those things. But what's a broader direction? If we're ignoring the needs of people, who are we ignoring?
God.
God.
We stray from the
Okay,
Lord. and
so
come back.
straying from God impacts not just our relationship with God, but our relationship with other people. Okay, that seems to be one alternative that keeps coming up, right? And hopefully that's been clear. Okay, what's the other direction?
Returning to God.
Returning to God, seeking God, steadfast. Okay, have we seen a third option pop up? See, I love it when my students are silent because you're correct. There doesn't seem to be an answer. Okay, either we're going this way or we're going this way. Which is it? You know, I realized today, oh, I like a life of balance. I like to be in the center. Right? And do it all. What keeps getting presented to us? This way or this way? Okay, does that match with what we've been reading so far? Okay, two ways. All right, off to Jim. Okay, which is after Obadiah and before Micah. Okay. Now I'm guessing that Jonah is Jonah. We know some stuff about Jonah. Okay. Even though it's a relatively short one, it's a lot easier. But you've heard of Jonah. We only have one assigned verse, but let's just review, because it's going to help us understand this context. All right. What do we know about Jonah? What was he called by God to go and do?
Preach
Go to Nineveh.
Preach to Nineveh. Which may have been the capital of the Assyrian Empire. It was certainly a big city. And what did Jonah say? Oh, not those people. So Jonah ran away, and where did he get to spend some quality time? Okay. Okay. Right, we've known that, right? To me, this is one of the first Bible stories we get as children, right? Because oh, cool, belly of a whale, right? You know, we can remember that one. We can paint little ceramic whales, right? This is a neat little time. And then he got spewed out, and he goes to Nineveh, and he's kind of like, oh, come on, why am I here? Well then, okay, so we get to chapter 3, right? For those of you with subject headings, what's the subject heading for chapter 3?
Conversion.
People actually turned around, converted. Okay? What is your what first subject heading at the beginning of chapter 4 say?
Jonah's anger.
Jonah's anger.
And he looked back.
Okay, well no, because he gets upset. What, you're saving these people? Because that's not who we're supposed to say it. That's not how we're supposed to do it. We're not judging. We're supposed to love God, and because of that, then love others. Okay? And yeah, we may not understand God's love, but at the same time, we have to understand, what do we deserve? Okay? And that should perhaps paint how we see other people. So yeah, Jonah gets upset.
He kind of missed the point, didn't he?
They don't deserve this, right? They got a bad grade, okay, or a detention, or however, right? Something, okay.
Except when that stuff happens to us, we say to God, we don't deserve this, right? So,
Yeah, which is a problem. So that kind of portrays how we see. If we're on one path or the other, that's going to portray how we see things. Okay? But you know what? We live in a society where justice for me, I get what's coming to me. Seems to be it. Okay, can someone read verse 10 of chapter 3?
When God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil ways, God changed his mind about the calamity that he had said he would bring upon them, and he did not do it.
Okay, could you read the very first few words, 6 or 7 words of chapter 4?
But this was very displeasing to Jonah.
Okay, now imagine this. God did not bring the calamity. God just saved people, and this was displeasing, because in Jonah's mind, these are the bad people. How could God love them?
And I knew you were gonna do that.
Yeah. So at first he was afraid for his life, but now he's like, how can you save them? So, you know, we have to think about that. Whoever treats us poorly, doesn't respect us, perhaps we see as an enemy, what does God want?
Love your enemies.
Restoration, love. And that is tough. But again, we've been given, you're going this way, or you're going this way. Okay? All right. So much for John.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Okay. But hopefully that illustrates and reemphasizes, what does God want for people? To be reconciled to God. Okay. And because they converted, right, so which puts off the calamity. All right. And Micah, we're going to read one of the Micah passages, because we're going to come back at the end to see the other one. Okay? So let's go to Micah chapter 4. Could someone read verses 1 through 4?
In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised up above the hills. People shall stream to it, and many nations shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between many peoples, and shall arbitrate between strong nations far away. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. But they shall all sit under their own vines and under their own fig trees, and no one shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken.
All right. Do we like that image? What seems appealing about this image?
peace.
Peace. Like, well, and I realize sometimes we see peace as spiritual peace or inner peace. This is talking about bigger than that, as in the physical peace, not fighting. Okay, as a student of history, and someone who pays occasional attention to current events, that's not the human way, for the most part, okay? Right, but peace, okay? God's house will be established, people will come to it, okay? And I realize it's not on here, but if you look at the second half of verse 5, we walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. Okay, so obedience, we have shade, we have enough to eat, we're not worried about fighting. That's the people of God. And I know there are times that, oh man, we get fired up, we are ready. Right, let's take on, let's fight, okay? But, again, verse 2 to me, right, is an example of seeking. Let us go to the house of God that he may teach us his ways, that we may walk in his paths. It's that seeking God, steadfast, okay? All right, that he will judge. But yeah, so this is obviously a famous passage, being swords into plowshares. That, I mean, can you imagine that? And especially we're in a situation where our country is sending lots and lots of military equipment and supplies to someone else for the purpose of war, to avoid using even more destructive weapons if the war gets bigger. Okay? That's not what God has in mind, ultimately. Okay? All right. And you're going to have to skip a few. We're skipping Nahum and Habakkuk, so if they're your favorites. And we're skipping Zephaniah and Haggai, right? We're just zipping through, so. Jump forward to Zechariah. And this is long, and we're not going to read the whole thing. In fact, we don't really have time to delve into it much at all. Okay. But chapter 9 says, judgment on Israel's enemies and oracle. So here's a vision. How does it start? The word of the Lord is against the land of. The word of the Lord is against. Okay? So bad things are going to happen to Israel's enemies. Okay. But then we get to verse 9, and what does your subject heading say there?
Becoming ruler of God's people.
Okay, and this may be interpreted as a New Testament right thing, but rejoice, shout, your king comes triumphant, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt. Does that sound familiar? Okay. Do you ever hear that when we're leading up to Easter? Do you ever hear that and think, oh, straight out of Zechariah? Okay, but there are connections here. Okay? So a ruler is coming. My covenant with you, I'll set prisoners free. Okay? And verse 16, the Lord their God will save them. Okay, so we have promise of judgment of the enemies, and God will save, and the king is coming. Now, this king is humble, riding on a colt, right? So the peace isn't because, ha ha ha, I won. We defeated the others in battle, but it's this image that does get reflected in the New Testament. Okay. Now let's go to Malachi. This is the last one of the Old Testament. Chapter 3, Malachi chapter 3. Oh, okay. Could someone read just verses 6 and 7 of Malachi 3?
For I, the Lord, do not change. Therefore you, O children of Jacob, have not perished. Ever since the days of your ancestors, you have turned aside from my statutes and have not kept them. Return to me, and I will return to you, says the Lord of hosts. But you say, how shall we return?
Okay, so then he says, well, and how do you rob God? Like, how are we robbing God? And he brings up the whole tithe issue. Right? What are you doing? You're robbing me, the whole nation. Bring the full tithe. And he said, he says, you've had empty rituals, evildoers prosper. This is how you have not honored God. Okay? Let's look at chapter 4, verse 2. For you who revere my name, the Son of Righteousness shall rise with healing in its wings. You shall go out leaping like calves from the stall. Hopefully that sounds like a happy time. I realize you and I, we're not farmers and ranchers, so we probably haven't seen calves in the stall that, earlier generations may have. To me, right, the animals I deal with regularly are my dogs, right? Dog leaping for joy, right? That's that image. So, right, the faithful are rewarded, God is coming, but we have to pay attention, okay? And like these people, we might say, well, how are we doing this? We have to pay attention to the Word of God and assess ourselves, right? Am I on that path to God, or do I need the return, to find the return? Because God is always there. And what did he say, right in the passage? He said, I do not change. And that's why you have not perished, because God wants us, okay, and desires that. Okay, let's go back to Micah chapter 6, if you can find it. Right after Joel, before Nahum. Okay. And I think this answers the question that just came up, how do we return to God? Also think that sometimes, as humans, it helps just to have a practical bit of advice. Kind of like my students, what do we have to know? What's going to be on the test? Right? How do we do this, right? Sometimes I have to show them how to do things. Can't assume, right? And so chapter 6, I'm going to start with verse 6. My subject says what God requires. Okay? So let's pay attention to this, because this is what we're going to end with for today. Right? The practical aspect, what does God require? What does God care about from us? Can someone read chapter 6, verses 6 to 8?
With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God.
Okay. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. Now, I realize that you and I are not bringing oil or animals to sacrifice, but in the end, right, although people just got chastised about the tithe, it's not how much money we're bringing, right, although that's a reflection of our relationship. Okay, I realize that none of you have offered your firstborn. Okay? And we're reminded, we're the mortals. So at the end says, walk humbly with your God. Okay? I wish we had time to explore this a little bit. We might start here next week. But what does it mean to walk humbly? To me, sometimes it means who is creator and who is created.